This is a week where world leaders are gathering in Glasgow to try and commit to saying they'll attempt to one day see if they can agree that they should stop maybe the climate apocalypse. That's right. It is the UN Climate Change Conference, COP26, because there have been 25 other attempts, which is cute how they count up like we have time. You know, like they should really be counting down. Like this should be COP 11, as in we have 11 years to solve the climate crisis. And then COP 10, COP 9, COP 8, and COP 0 is either like a raging party or all the world leaders have to collectively commit suicide. That's my feeling on that. And Biden really wanted this to be his like grand coming out party. He wanted to show leadership, that the United States was going to lead the way when it came to stopping climate change and curbing emissions. But he's not exactly living up to his promises because he's actually pushing more fossil fuel extraction as we speak because he says we basically need it. I think he blamed the supply chain essentially. But this is from the G20, which is just a few weeks ago. He said, with gasoline prices rising above $3.30 a gallon nationwide, Mr. Biden over the weekend urged major energy producing countries with spare capacity to boost production, part of a larger effort to pressure OPEC countries and Russia to create the supply of oil. He was joined by Macron of France, whose country hosted the 2015 Paris meeting. Obviously, you guys remember that one. Biden admitted on the surface, it seems like an irony. He said at a news conference, but the truth of the matter is you all know, everyone knows that the idea we're going to be able to move to renewable energy overnight, he said, was just not rational. He said it does on the surface seem inconsistent, but it's not all inconsistent in that no one has anticipated that this year we'd be in a position, or even next year, that we're not going to use any more oil and gas. We're not going to be engaged in any fossil fuels. We're going to stop subsidizing those fossil fuels. We're going to be making significant changes, and it just makes the argument that we should move more rapidly to renewable energy, to wind and solar and other means of energy. If you didn't understand any of that, you're likewise, bro, because that made no sense. It was like, I don't know, but we're in this situation anyway. We gotta do more drugs to stop the drugs. You see what I'm saying? And he says he's going to stop funding and subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. It looks like that is not true because as part of the climate and social spending plan that we're going to soon talk about, but the one making its way through Congress or not, no part of that plan talks about eliminating subsidies for the fossil fuel industry, which are estimated to be $20 billion annually. So what? So here we are, and we're kind of flopping, you guys. We're kind of like, this was supposed to be Biden's, like, again, coming out internationalism party, and we can't really get our own house in order. And there's a lot of problems with the stuff that's even in or not in the Build Back Better Act when it comes to the climate. But thoughts on this? Thoughts on that? Just like the idea that we have to like burn oil to save oil. Does that make any sense?
Well, Biden, we elected him because he's full of shit. So none of this is like that's why they elected him. So none of this is a surprise at all. But I guess just for him to say that we're, you make some now, but I promise we're going to stop subsidizing, to make that jump. I mean, he says it's irony, but it is just an outright lie that nobody believes. It's infuriating to sit here and to listen to you read his quotes is all I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, he was definitely not pulling any punches when it came to how unwilling he was to like end fracking expansion, right? So he was like, no, I am pro fracking. Meanwhile, this week he's also saying that he wants to reduce methane emissions by 30%, and methane emissions are hugely related to fracking. And a lot of that, the emissions from fracking. So again, he went bent over backwards to tell centrists, but mostly conservatives and mostly his own party, that he was all on board with fracking.
I mean, the bottom line is, I don't think the gap between liberal rhetoric and liberal action on climate change is I think one of the major, probably second most to right wing media, drivers of climate denialism. They speak in these apocalyptic, correctly, by the way, apocalyptic, urgent terms. This kind of platitudes about believing the science, capital B, capital S. This kind of patronizing, as if science is somehow politically neutral language. And then when it comes to actual policy, like for example, oil and gas permits, and from the governor of California, from not only not banning fracking, but like aggressively lobbying how much they're not going to ban fracking, which we now know is comparable to coal in terms of actual carbon emissions and the process of making it. And then on the one hand, they do this kind of, we believe in the science stuff, and this is kind of a distillation of a lot of liberalism, which is, you say the right thing, you sort of say the right racial justice language, you kind of say the right, the climate speak, the right kind of nonprofit speak. But then at the end of the day, you do a lot of tax breaks. There's a lot of tax incentives in the bill that are not bad. It was something like 350 billion, but that's not like, you're not, if we're going to come close to meeting the threshold, the 3.7 Fahrenheit 2 degree threshold that everyone at COP26 is allegedly angling for, you have to stop fossil fuels from coming out of the ground now. You should have stopped it 10 years ago. This is just, again, we talk about the science. That is just the science. That's not negotiable. And then we talk about being carbon neutral by 2050 to reach this average. But what people understand is that average is a global average. And if every country strives for the same average, you disproportionately affect poor countries and developing countries in the global south, because the average is a global average, which ignores the fact that the U.S. is historically the largest carbon emitter, and per capita the largest, I think second only to Saudi Arabia, on Earth. And
suddenly the U.S. believes in equity. Like, oh yes, we believe that.
Right.
Well,
so this is a classic example of we've come up the ladder of fossil fuel emissions and became extremely wealthy. But now we're going to sort of put the burden on these poor countries to have the same burden we do, even though the burden should be proportionate to historic fossil fuel emissions. Which, if that were it's like this argument about overpopulation. It's like, oh, we have too many people. It's like, well, if you look at how many people in the global north and the United States consume versus people in sub-Saharan Africa, like if the criteria for overpopulation is too much consumption of resources, then you should be eating a gun right now. Not to be macabre about it, but like that's just the reality. And so you have this kind of inverted, upside down triangle of responsibility where the U.S. refuses to kind of take that. And of course, half the time we don't even talk about the drivers of climate change. We don't talk about the fossil fuel oil companies. I mean, right. ABC News had this really, it was a great report in many ways. It was 4.5 minutes. They went to Madagascar and talked to all these people who are suffering from climate famine. And not once did they mention oil and gas or fracking. It was this abstraction. It's a moral failing on the part of individuals versus industries that drive this.
Yes. I wanted to just bring up one other thing, which is that it is, from what I've been reading on this, and we have to kind of move on, but it is interesting to see the ways that once again, it kind of all goes back to our domestic policy and the fact that Biden wants to deliver on promises to the world, maybe, kind of, but he's hamstrung also by Republicans, and whether or not he likes being hamstrung by them or whether he's not, and Democrats like Joe Manchin. So this is, this is a piece from Truth Out talking about how one of the biggest pieces of the climate money that is in the Build Back Better Act has been stripped out of it. And that's the one where there's actual consequences. So it's $150 billion, which is, again, not that much, of clean energy performance program, which was at once the centerpiece of the climate proposals that incentivizes the move to clean energy, but more importantly, penalizes those companies that don't make the move. And that was stripped from the reconciliation bill, of course, because of Manchin, who is against any kind of fines, any kind of taxes, any kind of anything that would hurt his own bottom line, because of course he's invested in coal. So it's like, even the shit, it's so sad that it all goes through Joe Manchin. And I'm not so cynical to say that Joe Biden absolutely is not serious at all about climate change. I think he is, but I think he's way too wedded to this bullshit notion of bipartisanship and sort of glad handing and getting along with people who want to tank his agenda, completely want to tank it. And it's so sad that the world is like, oh, we can't make good on our promises, or at least start to, because by the way, without those penalties, the estimates are that we won't be able to reduce our emissions by half by 2030, which is the goal, and which would keep us on track to the commitments that we made to the United Nations and to the world. And not to mention would fucking save our own lives. So it's
but you have I know we have to move on too, but then you have regular people. So as much as we're talking all these grand ideas and everything, you have regular people who get mad when they have to pay a little more for gas, or when they have to pay 35% more for gas. So as long as we stay consumers and we continue to be America, we are fucked, because nobody wants to be uncomfortable.
Exactly. And imagine Biden trying to run for re-election when like gas is at, $5, $6, whatever it is, which, by the way, gas prices in this country are insanely cheap. If you've ever bought gas in another country, like, it's just absurd how expensive it is. But yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. It's like, well, you won't be reelected if somehow fucking gas prices are too high when you're trying to get reelected, and they'll blame your climate agenda. At least the right will.
Well, they're going to blame it no matter what. So, I mean, yeah, the
might as well have our lives and then take the blame.
I think Biden and a lot of Democrats largely view climate still like, again, I don't think they kind of believe they can do anything about it. I think it's a lot of theater. And I think we have to come to that cold realization. This kind of electoral math with gas prices is kind of one factor, but the way they talk about it, the way the media talks about it, it's called, routinely climate is called a progressive wish list. It's seen as this kind of ideologically, again, it's like power windows or dual side airbags. It's not essential to having a car. It'd be nice, XM radio would be nice to have, but it's kind of extra versus this existential thing we have to do in the next 10 years or we're not going to make it. And the gap between rhetoric and action indicates to me, and I think action always matters more, that a lot of the people in charge are worried about climate mitigation. They're worried about shoring up naval bases. They're worried about border security, but don't really think they can actually reverse it. I think it's mostly just theater.
Well, let's move on to our last, just super upper conversation.
Sorry, I don't want to believe that. I'm not trying to be cynical, but people's actions matter, and people talk about climate like it's this ideological left-wing radical kind of superfluous and sort of, giving a pony to everybody kind of thing. And it's not. That doesn't match the actual science, and it doesn't match what they actually say and do.
No, for sure. No one is actually willing because it is all tied to ramping down consumerist capitalism, trade, not for xenophobic reasons, but weird white supremacist nationalistic reasons, but to save the planet. And that means a hit of the GDP, which fucking means nothing in the lives of everyday people. No one's willing politically to stick their necks out for that. And Biden certainly isn't. So maybe Manchin is a foil for him. What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Do it.